Ryan and Eric, who would you say some of your favorite guests are that we've had on the podcast?
Ryan, I would say it was your dad, a Vietnam veteran that had intense action stories as well as touching and meaningful, content about, his life and yours.
That's true. I do have to say my dad, he has to be my favorite, but a close second would probably be COVID virologist.
Oh, that was amazing. I'd say it's a toss-up between Jason Weems, who is a comedian who died on stage and was resurrected to be on our podcast and raise his family and other things, other responsibilities. And we also had a Marine One, or like presidential helicopter pilot on the show, and that was crazy.
That's a good one. That's hard to beat. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, tune into the Baggage Podcast, where four friends, a prosecutor, a doctor, a comedian, and a journalist, interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. Search for Baggage wherever you get your podcast.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest is Hollywood writer and producer Alan Katz. Over the course of his writing and producing career, Alan Katz has written movies and TV shows like HBO's iconic Tales from the Crypt.
I grew up a movie fan. I loved the Marx Brothers. Groucho Marx, iconic to me. And so the Cryptkeeper became my little Groucho Marx. And I invested him, I had invested him with a personality so I could write him, like I said. And being a writer and therefore lazy, I reached for the closest thing to me, which was me. And so I filled the Cryptkeeper with me. And so the character, well, it looks like the puppet, he sounds like John, but every word that he spoke, every thought that came out of his head was me.
Let's join today's conversation with Tales from the Crypt writer and producer Alan Katz.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for this week's show. Our guest is Hollywood writer and producer Alan Katz. Hello, Alan, and welcome to the podcast.
I'm going to jump in. It's K-A-T-Z, Katz.
So
it's Katz, but no worries. You know, when I got to Hollywood in 1985, I was not the first Alan Katz to get there. And so everything I understand about the business is having to explain to people, no, I'm this other guy. And that's okay because, I'm Alan Katz.
I apologize. I wrote Katz. No. I just
No. Look. It really, it's truly, it's neither here nor there. I'm still who I am. So, thank you so much for having me here, Melvin. Really and truly, I've been looking forward to having this conversation.
This is fun. All right. So speaking of your name, you're listed as A.L. Katz on your IMDb profile. So is that your professional name, or do you prefer Alan?
I go by Alan. I go by A.L. because, like I said, when I got to Los Angeles in 1985, I learned, but as soon as I hit the ground, that I was not the first Alan Katz in the Writers Guild. The Alan Katz who preceded me, A-L-L-A-N Katz, had quite a good resume. He had written for MASH and Carol Burnett. He was very much in demand as a showrunner. He had a script called The Hunchback of UCLA that was out to all the studios. It was a feature film, and it was getting great response. Now, I had just arrived, and I was taking around a little comedy script because I thought I was going to be a comedy guy. And I would walk into meetings, and they would say, "Hi, it's great to meet you. We love The Hunchback of UCLA." And the first couple of times, I'd go, "Oh no, that's the other Alan Katz," and they'd suddenly look at me like, "Who are you? And why did we?" Those meetings never went terribly well, as you can imagine. But then after a little while, hey, dog learned a couple of new tricks, and they'd say, "Hey, we love The Hunchback of UCLA." And I'd say, "Well, thank you very much." And If you love that, I think you're going to love what I'm pitching you here today.
Nice.
Later,
Nice.
it's funny. Here's a funny little side note. When I first got to LA in 1985, one of the first things I did was I started taking a couple of classes with the Groundlings, an improv comedy group that's produced a lot of people from SNL. My first Groundlings class was taught by one of the founders of the Groundlings, a terrific improv comedian named Phyllis Katz, whose brother was Alan Katz.
Couldn't get away from him.
Absolutely not. So my name is neither here nor there. Really, it's so I go Al Katz simply because so we didn't get each other's checks, which would have been better for me because his checks probably way better than any of mine. But at the end of the day, that's my long-winded explanation. Oh, God, please call me Alan.
Okay, I will call you Alan. So what does this phrase mean to you? It's not TV, it's HBO.
That has everything to do with Tales from the Crypt. When we started doing Tales from the Crypt back in the early 1990s, it was a very different TV and feature film environment. The two universes were light years away from each other. And the occasional TV person, the Tom Hanks or Robin Williams, would go from TV into feature films. But if you were going from feature films into TV, that was not a good sign for your career. At the time, HBO they were basically movies they were dipping their toe into original programming. They had a show called First and 10, another called Dream On. But these were basically just single camera shows with breasts and profanity. That was really the only thing that would keep them off of NBC or ABC. Otherwise, they were just a normal show. Suddenly, 4 mega Hollywood producers approach HBO. There's Joel Silver, that's the Matrix movies, Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, Robert Zemeckis, that's Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Walter Hill, 48 Hours, and Richard Donner, the Superman Returns, and 1,000 wonderful movies. These 4 mega producers approach HBO and they say, we want to put feature film scope inside your little TV box. And HBO went, yes, do whatever you want. And so that's what they did. They went right to work. Normally in TV, you'd go through a development process to figure out what your TV show is. You would also get yourself a deficit partner because whoever's broadcasting it, whatever they pay for the license fee for the first time or even the second time, it's not going to pay for the cost of production unless you're doing it super on the cheap, in which case, and it had to do with the old business model of how a TV show back in the day, before it was subscription based, got into profitability. No development process happened and there was no deficit partner. And so they went right to writing episodes. The Cryptkeeper character in the EC comics on which this was based is an old white guy with stringy hair. The producers, not going through a development process, but wanting to find a host, Joel Silver bumped into Kevin Yeager, and Kevin Yeager created the physical Cryptkeeper puppet, which is actually 6 puppeteers. It's not one puppet. It's 6 different puppeteers working in harmony. Kevin found John Kassir, who became the voice of the Cryptkeeper. And we'll come back to the evolution of the Cryptkeeper, but they created this incredible show, this feature scope inside little box, and it was incredibly successful. Now, before it actually hit the air, there was a cast and crew screening. Some press were there, and after the first episode that rolled, I think it was Dick Donner's "Dig This Cat, He's Real Gone." Oh, there's some chatter in the audience. One of the crew members said to the other, "Wow, that's great TV." And then one said, "No, it's not TV, it's HBO." And the HBO executives in the row ahead turned back like they had just heard not only their new ad slogan, but their their raison d'etre, their whole philosophy. Yeah, they suddenly began to think of themselves as bigger than TV, and the way to do it was to not think television tweaked, but to think in grand scope. The last episode of the first season of Tales from the Crypt that I did was Robert Zemeckis. The episode was called Yellow. And what Bob wanted to do, he wanted to pay homage to one of his favorite films when he was a film school student at USC, Paths of Glory by Stanley Kubrick. Starred Kirk Douglas. And so he wanted the World War I in the trenches movie, and he wanted Kirk Douglas to be in the episode, since we were thinking grandiose. We were going to recreate World War I with Kirk Douglas in our little TV box, and we got him.
Wow.
And that was how we thought. So among the great pleasures of doing Tales from the Crypt was, and anyone and everyone who you ever talked to who worked on Tales from the Crypt would tell you, looking back on their careers, it was maybe the highlight because of the incredible freedom that we had working with HBO. Gosh, over the course of the 75 episodes that I did, I got 3 notes. That's awesome. Tremendous freedom to hey, you hired us for our vision of the show, and that's what we delivered. Now, in I went aboard the 3rd season. The first season of Crypt was 6 episodes. Then HBO ordered 18. So 24 episodes, the first 2 seasons, no deficit partner, but no development of the Cryptkeeper character. Whoever wrote the scripts would just throw lines at the puppet, and then the puppet would talk. So he was really, as the 2nd season came to an end, he was the puppet called the Cryptkeeper. Because there was no deficit partner, HBO had been cash flowing everything, and they got to the end of the 2nd season, and the HBO handed the executive producers a financial statement that said, "Guys, you're $1 million cash in the pocket. You want to do your season 3? Get out your checkbooks and pay us." And since they were going to make more money on season 3 than just $1 million it was going to cost them, and they were going to take that $1 million out of the budget anyway to pay themselves back, they canceled the wrap party and fired everybody. And my partner at the time, Gil Adler, and I, we went aboard. HBO wanted Gil in particular because Gil, as a producer, he tremendous creative chops. He came out of the theater, but he was an accountant by trade. And as an accountant, he understood that if you've got a $1 to make your movie, do not spend $1. You haven't got it. Hey, if you can do your movie for 99 cents, make it look like $1, so much the better. Or 98 cents. Hey, if you can do it for 98 cents, make it look like $1.05. Awesome. So this was the philosophy. You didn't solve problems by throwing money at them. You solved problems by throwing your creativity at them. And so Gil had solved a terrible dilemma for HBO in a series called Vietnam War Stories. And it had been in terrible financial difficulty, and the producers, the executive producers, didn't know what they were doing. They sent Gil to Savannah. He solved the problem. The show won awards. Now, at the end of season 2 of Tales from the Crypt, a similar kind of a problem. And so they wanted Gil, in essence, to see the show out. I was Gil's creative partner. We were writing partners. And so I came in as, well, like I said, they never ran Crypt like a TV show. So there was no one keeping, it's a franchise show. It's based on a comic book. And so you want the comic book to be present in all the episodes. But it doesn't happen by magic. Someone has to be minding the store. And so my 2 jobs on Tales from the Crypt, when we went aboard what was supposed to be the last season, was one, to bring all the franchise goodness from the Tales from the Crypt comic books, from the EC Comics, and make sure that that every episode was redolent of them. The other job I had was to write all the Cryptkeeper segments. Well, as no one had created a character, I don't know how you write a cipher. And so just to do my job, I needed to create a character. I grew up a movie fan. I loved the Marx Brothers. Love the Marx Brothers. Groucho Marx, iconic to me. And so the Crypt Keeper became my little Groucho Marx.
Mm.
And I invested him, had invested him with a personality so I could write him, like I said. And being a writer and therefore lazy, I reached for the closest thing to me, which was me. And so I filled the Crypt Keeper with me. And so the character, well, it looks like the puppet. He sounds like John, but every word that he spoke, every thought that came out of his head was me. And so the Crypt Keeper did not really become a character, the character we know as the Crypt Keeper, until that point, when suddenly he was filled with an interior life. There wasn't a history. There was a persona, in essence, that the audience immediately grasped. And suddenly, because we were getting stars again, and all right, so we put some polish back on the franchise. HBO ordered more episodes, but the thing that had actually happened, the franchise, Tales from the Crypt, was born. And it was the Crypt Keeper that really strangely became the franchise. A few people have been trying to remake Tales from the Crypt for a long time. You know, it's been 30 years since we made it, and the fan base is growing because we did something right on a couple different levels. But a few years ago, and there's a reason why it can never happen, I'll get to that shortly, M. Night Shyamalan wanted to remake Tales from the Crypt a couple of years ago, and I guess he purchased an option on the original comics, and he did not understand that the Crypt Keeper he got was the old white guy with stringy hair. He, of course, assumed he was going to get the Crypt Keeper. But these are two separate pieces of intellectual property, two separate pieces of IP. And EC Comics, Bill Gaines, the creator also of Mad Magazine, his family, Bill is no longer with us, they own that Crypt Keeper. But the Crypt Partners own the Crypt Keeper. And the problem is that the Crypt partner that always walks point is Joel Silver. And Joel Silver, in addition to being a very successful producer of quite a number of huge action adventure franchises, a very difficult personality, larger than life, more so in his own head. And so rules are for other people. And after a while, pretty much everybody gets to a tipping point where Joel assumes a kind of critical mass inside their heads. The last thing they'd ever do is work with Joel Silver ever again. And this is what happened with the Bill Gaines' family. They had enough of Joel and would never work with Joel ever again or make a deal with him if their lives depended upon it. And so Tales from the Crypt and the Crypt Keeper are divorced forever. Where will the children go at Christmas? I don't know.
All right, so I want to talk about your career some more, but first, let's get a little bit more personal. Let's find out a little bit more about you. You're from Baltimore, and you attended Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. So, was there a cultural adjustment going from Maryland to New York for you?
Oh gosh, I grew up in an upper middle class Jewish suburb outside of Baltimore, a place called Pikesville. My public high school was 90% Jewish. On the Jewish holidays, even the Jewish kids didn't show up. What was the point? Nothing, literally nothing was going to happen there. And so, yeah, I grew up in an absolute bubble. My dad was a surgeon. Most of the people that in our social circle were doctors, lawyers, and so doctors' kids, lawyers' kids. And yeah, there were certain expectations, but very upper middle class Jewish world. Vassar is very, very different. It is very waspy. white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Now, that was part of the attraction to me because I was ready to get the hell out of Baltimore. It had gotten very, very provincial to me. I had aspirations. I was always very theatrical. And I have not an ounce of mathematical skill. Me in medical school were never going to happen. And, you know, it wasn't that my father didn't try. I was groomed from the time that I was 16. I would do, because I loved photography, and so I would do photo work for my father's surgery so that he would take, for when he would do rounds, I would create slides for him. So from the age of 16, I would scrub in and watch him perform appendectomies and bowel resections. But it became I was theatrical. I did shows. And so Vassar was especially appealing because you could write your way across the curriculum. It wasn't heavy on testing. Writing was the thing. And hey, I couldn't do math. I loved science, but I couldn't really do it. But I could write, and I was writing professionally from the time I was 16. And so at Vassar, I learned something essential. I was a drama major, and so acting, but you had to take a number of classes in dramatic literature. And the dramatic literature professor at Vassar was a guy named Everett Sprinchorn. And Everett Sprinchorn was one of the world authorities on Ibsen and Strindberg. In fact, Sprinchorn had translated a number of Strindberg plays, which were produced professionally. He was a known scholar. And his lecture on Ibsen's Ghosts, it was one of those eye-opening moments when Ghosts is the story of a character named Mrs. Alvin. And she has been kind of coerced into marrying a man she didn't love, who ends up cheating on her constantly. He has syphilis, ends up giving it to their son. And now it's 18 years later, and the son, Oswald, has come home to die. And ghosts, it's the ghosts of the father. It's the sins of the father being visited upon the son. Ibsen was a utilitarian playwright. Art should do things. It should change the world. And so at the very end of the play, Mrs. Alving wheels Oswald downstage so that he's facing the audience. She is standing behind him. He cannot see her face, but the audience can see everything. And he's saying, "Oh, look at the sun. The sun is setting. Oh, look at the sunset. Isn't it beautiful, mother? Isn't it beautiful?" And of course, behind him, how much more metaphor do you want? Her sun is setting, and that's where the play ends. And Mr. Sprinchorn deconstructs it, puts it back together again, takes us through the emotional underpinnings to that moment of soul-crushing tragedy. And in that moment, I suddenly understood storytelling and what a story was supposed to do. Now, I did not have the chops whatsoever to reproduce that, but I understood at least, all right, this is the bar you're trying to clear every single time, not once, but every single time you sit down to write. Good luck. Good luck. But hey, you got to know what you're shooting for. So the cultural differences were profound. I was intrigued. I've always been intrigued by cultures not mine. And yeah, the WASP world was fascinating to me because it was so incredibly different. And I became very friendly with a family, the Shookers, taken in under their wing. They lived in Bronxville, New York. Dinner at their house, weekends at their house were exquisite because I was sitting inside another culture, visiting, and welcomed. Of course, it's always up to a point because you're not them, but still welcomed. And it was gratifying and it was educational. As I began to learn more about the world, it gets easier to write more about the world. When you grow up in a little bubble, you don't know it at the time. You Of course, especially when you're young and male, you think you know everything, but as you begin to learn how little you know, the world becomes more and more fascinating and filled with stuff you're dying to know. So I was already a writer when I went to Vassar, but I began to learn a couple of things, and I certainly had a goal. I had a friend. I was in New York. I thought theater, me and theater. That's what I'm going to do. I had a friend that I grew up with in Baltimore who'd become an agent at William Morris in Los Angeles, and she said, "Why don't you write a screenplay?" Well, a lot of the writing I was doing in Baltimore, I worked for a little production company that made training films and educational films, and one of the directors, a guy named Steve Yeager, was friendly with John Waters and had worked on a couple of John Waters movies, and so was part of the Baltimore film community. And he was always looking he wanted to figure out a way he wanted to direct a movie and was looking for someone to write one with him. And so we began working on a script. And Carol said, "Well, send it to me." I sent it to her. She said, "This is good. You should come out and meet great people." So in June of 1985, I headed out to LA for a week. Now, to me at that point, a burgeoning New Yorker, a theater person, LA was the stupidest place on the planet. The land of the avocado head. I'd been there once when I was 14. It's the land of the avocado head. But I get there, New York, in June. It's hot, it's steamy, it smells like urine most of the time. It is not a pleasant place to walk around. But LA, and this is 1985, a lot less crowded than it is today. In June, after the June gloom in the morning, it's beautiful. It's 70, 80 degrees. It's lovely. It's the desert here. There is no humidity. And people were so nice to me. The meetings were awesome. The ones who said, Alan Katz, the right Alan Katz versus the other Alan Katz. Most of the meetings were wonderful. Having smoke blown up your backside is a very nice thing to happen. One evening, my agent Carol took me to a premiere, St. Elmo's Fire. That is intoxicating, heady stuff. And the next morning, I actually had a morning with no meetings, and someone said, "Hey, take a drive through Topanga Canyon." And so I did. And somewhere between the 101, the freeway, you drive through the Santa Monica Mountains to the Pacific Coast Highway, where right at the beach. And somewhere between those 2 points, as I drove through the Santa Monica Mountains, you're within the city limits of Los Angeles. It's not crowded at all there. By the time I got to the water, I had been totally converted. LA had completely seduced me. The next month, I moved out. And I left New York for Los Angeles, a cultural change. And I never felt like I belonged in Baltimore. I belonged in Poughkeepsie, and New York was never going to be my town. For some reason, something about LA I loved. I've come to, as I've tried to figure this place out through the almost 40 years I've been here, I think I've come to appreciate that as much sunshine as there is here, there's a darkness, a strange darkness that seems to outshine the light. And it's such a twisted place. Something about that appeals to me. Hey, I have a taste for strange stories. Tales from the Crypt. I also did The Outer Limits. Yeah, I don't know. I have a taste for the strange and the odd. I look at the world from a slightly different perspective. LA was very appealing to me, and I got very lucky because when I met Gil Adler that first week, well, as I told you, Gil and I ultimately ended up doing Tales from the Crypt. And Tales from the Crypt, suddenly, hey, I became a player of a kind. I had some cred. Universal Pictures, well, HBO ordered a bunch more seasons. Universal Pictures said, wow, yeah, we love this franchise. Now there's a franchise. And they ordered 3 movies. And nice. Heady stuff. The first movie we put together was called Demon Knight, a very successful movie. It starred Billy Zane as the villain. He's terrific in it. Jada Pinkett is wonderful in the movie. Bill Sadler's
who's also from Baltimore.
Yes. It was I think we made a good movie. Now, the mandate from Universal Pictures was, it's an anthology, make 3 different movies. And so Gil and I, neither of us were horror guys, but hey, we were making our living in horror, but we really did not want to get pigeonholed in horror. And so our aspiration for the second feature film was something completely different, as Monty Python would say. And we had been developing a script based on one that we had read called Fat Tuesday. We developed it into a thing called Dead Easy. Very different from the first, from Demon Knight, which was kind of a monster movie. Dead Easy was a taut psychological thriller about a recovered memory that took place in the swamps outside New Orleans. A wonderful villainous Harlequin character. And Universal Pictures must have been into it because we were spending money. We were casting. We had cast a young unknown actress named Salma Hayek to play the female lead. We spent months in New Orleans scouting locations, getting it ready. 3 weeks before the start of principal photography in New Orleans, Universal Pictures said, "Stop! Don't spend another penny. Come home." Then we arrived back in Los Angeles, and they put another script that we had never seen or heard of before, called Bordello of Blood, under our noses. They said, "You're going to do this instead. You still start in 3 weeks." Bordello of Blood, where did this come from? All right. Well, at about this same time, a new studio called DreamWorks had come into existence. And DreamWorks was Steven Spielberg leaving Universal, not the lot, he was still on the lot, but leaving Universal and becoming a studio unto himself. And he began to make talent deals with other people. Universal was desperately afraid of losing another big piece of talent, Robert Zemeckis. One of my executive producers, Steven, was his mentor. And Universal approached Bob. They said, "Bob, we love you at Universal. What can we do to make you stay?" I don't know any other part of that deal. I know one deal point. And that was Universal agreed to purchase for $500,000, $500,000, the first student script that Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the future Back to the Future guys, ever wrote when they were students, film students at USC. $500,000 for a student script. That was it. Just to put a clever way to put money in Bob's pocket, make him happy. And that was supposed to be it. But Universal suddenly sat there thinking, well, we're going to eat $500,000. Hey, wait a minute. I was about to executive produce this other movie, this Dead Easy thing. It's $50,000 for that script. Toss it. We'll take it out of their budget. This script has Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale's name on it. It's bigger than Alan Katz and Gil Adler. Guys, we've saved you from yourselves. This is how Universal saw it. Now, we all therefore went from, really not just Gil and I, but the entire creative team, from making about to make a movie we all really wanted to make because it represented, hello everybody, here's who we really are, to now we're making a student script. Well, of course, none of us wanted to make that movie, and certainly we start in 3 weeks. How do you rewrite a student script in 3 weeks? The main character of Bordello of Blood is a small town detective. Now, ask yourself this question. How much business is a detective really going to do in a small town? Not enough to be a small town detective. It's a character that doesn't actually exist, except in the minds of film school students who don't know anything because they're just film school students. And so it was an impossible assignment. Hey, I'm also being asked to rewrite Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale. Now, Bob was, I loved working for Bob. Everything I know about the art of collaboration, I learned at Bob's feet. And Bob was incredibly gracious about it. Hey, it was kind of funny, really, because this was not the intention, but here we are. And, Bob was busy making Forrest Gump at that particular point. He wasn't worried about our problems. And so we set off to make a movie that literally nobody who made the movie, literally nobody wanted to make. When you set off to do something for all the wrong reasons, do not be surprised when every day is stupider than the day before, which is exactly what happened making Bordello of Blood. And when it was all done and said, it was my own personal Waterloo. And it was such a terrible creative experience. It was a soul-crushing experience that it destroyed my 10-year-long friendship. Bill was my best friend in the world. It destroyed that friendship. Our creative partnership ended, and we didn't speak for 25 years. My career went into a tailspin because there was something else going on there, but we'll come to that because this is about journeys, and we're into the journey part here. I went into a 2-decade-long deepening depression and a writer's block I didn't even know I was experiencing. And I did the outer limits. There were some highlights here and there, but for the most part, I lost connection with whatever mojo I had. And it turned out that I was keeping a secret from myself. I've been keeping I kept the secret from myself for 45 years. That at the age of 14, I was sexually assaulted twice by the religious director at the synagogue where my family belonged. Now, it wasn't the first time that it happened. It's the second time that really got me because I didn't say anything about the first time, which is why the second time happened. And so it turned out I had blamed myself for that and every bad thing that ever happened to me. But there's another thing. I was keeping this a secret from myself. In other words, I could not even tell my own story of me to me. Well, how can you really expect to tell other people's stories when you can't really tell your own? I came very close to a bad ending, but I got very, very lucky and I bounced. And between finding the right medication quickly, which I had researched myself, because coming out of the medical culture, I knew that my GP, as caring as he was, had no background in this kind of medication. The last pharmaceutical rep who came through the office said, "Hey, you got any depressed patients? Give them this." And they were, "Okay, we'll try that out." So I knew I was going to get whatever. I was desperately afraid that, as some mood stabilizers can do, that whatever creative spark I still had left and I'm trying to find a connection to, this would snuff it. And so I was very, very careful looking for the one that I hoped wouldn't snuff it. And I got really, really lucky. Oh, gosh, I got lucky. My GPs agreed to prescribe it. I picked it up. I told my family what I was going to do. And I got super lucky. Within 36 hours, at the minimal dose, I leveled. I felt it work. And so really between that, which put the darkness in a cage, and I have a very good therapist who I've had for a decade and change, and copious amounts of THC, I was able to confront what had happened to me. And it's true what they say, the truth will set you free. And confronting what had happened to me, just being able to tell my story to me. One, the emotional trauma I could begin to heal as opposed to just continue to be in pain. And the healing process was gorgeous. And I absolutely am still going through the healing process, but yes, it's gorgeous. But I also, the bigger part of what happened. Well, now that I could tell my story, to me, I could tell my story. I could tell anybody's story. And I went from being, I'll pat myself on the back, a really good writer, to being a storyteller. And that's a very different thing. And I had been telling the Bordello of Blood stories through this whole period because, I guess I'm trying to figure it all out. And one day, a fan group called Dads from the Crypt, a podcast called Dads from the Crypt, they reviewed episodes of Tales from the Crypt and gave parenting advice. And I thought that was hilarious. And so Jason Stein, one of the three dads, he said, "We're going to be reviewing one of the episodes that you wrote. You want to sit in?" I went, yeah, great. And it was so much fun. A couple of weeks later, Jason contacted me again and said, hey, we're going to be reviewing Bordello of Blood. You want to sit in again? And I said, Jason, the story of the making of Bordello of Blood is not a half-hour conversation. It's a podcast unto itself. And suddenly I thought, I have to tell this story. And thus, my first podcast, the How Not to Make a Movie podcast, was born. And the first season, the first 5 episodes especially, I told the story from start to finish of the making of Bordello of Blood and everything that happened as a result. Now, in order to tell the story, I had to get back in touch with Gil. Because I couldn't, my goal was I wanted to tell the story. The truth had set me free. And I wanted to tell the story with absolute honesty, especially everything that I did wrong. Because I bore a lot of the responsibility. Hey, I was making a movie I didn't want to make. And I produced it. I produced that movie in that way. And yeah, I wasn't the cause of all the chaos, but I did nothing to fix it. I was part of the problem and never, ever part of any kind of solution. But I had come to see this. And this was part of the story that I wanted to tell. There were only 2 people that I really wanted to rake over the coals. And one was Dennis Miller, the star of the movie, simply because he's just not a nice person. And the other person was Sylvester Stallone, who inserted his presence into our movie by, at the time that we were making Bordello of Blood in Vancouver, Joel was producing another big movie called Assassins, which was shooting in Seattle across the border. Dick Donner, one of my other executive producers, was directing the movie, starred Antonio Banderas and Stallone. At the time, Stallone was engaged to a supermodel named Angie Everhart. And one day, Sylvester approached Joel on the set and said, hey, Joel, you may make a movie in Vancouver. You put my girlfriend Angie in the movie. We could visit across the board. And rather than being a good executive producer and saying, that's a great idea, Sly, let me run it past the guys and then see if it works for them, he said, that's a great idea, Sly, period. And suddenly like I said, we didn't do anything on that movie for a good reason. Suddenly we hired the villain. It's the most important part of the whole. Angie's a lovely human being. She was a great supermodel. It's not a fair ask. She did not have the chops or the confidence, and that's really important, to pull off any such role. It was, she was not cast for any of the right reasons. And in point of fact, Stallone was intending to use our movie as a consolation prize. He intended to break up with her, and we were going to be hey, I got your movie, didn't I? Which is exactly what happened. And so that was a very deliberate bit of cruelty. And so I have no problem with calling that out by name. I think that kind of, because Angie was lovely, and we were forced to keep his secret. We kind of didn't know he was going to break up with her or when he was going to break up with her, but our set talked to their set. And we heard everything. And we knew all kinds of stuff that was happening on that set, that he was cheating on her behind his back. We heard about it every day. And yeah, so of all the people in the story, the one that I really wanted to, him. But otherwise, telling the story, well, getting Gil involved, our friendship rekindled and our creative relationship rekindled. We're working on a couple things together. But telling the story was revelatory. Entertainment Weekly called the first season the best film podcast of 2022.
Nice.
What the author of the piece and why he wrote those really kind words was the honesty. And he wanted to know that the honesty wasn't a put on for the microphone, that it was real. And so when he interviewed Gil and I, and he heard really, the only way to tell the story was just, and hey, that was the nature of our relationship at its best, was we just had this really, this lovely honesty with each other. And that's exactly, in all my years in film and TV, I cast a lot of actors.
All right, let me ask you a specific question about podcasting.
Yeah. Yes, which is kind of what I was heading into, but
Okay.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you have a couple podcasts now, titles such as the Donor Podcast and the How Not to Make a Movie podcast that you mentioned. Is DNA or being a filmmaker a scarier topic to discuss?
DNA is far scarier. Being a filmmaker is, well, ultimately, the How Not to Make a Movie podcast is, these days, I'm into the 4th episode. I'm talking about, it's a nuts and bolts inside baseball view of the filmmaking storytelling craft and what happens when occasionally the craft turns to crap. So that's the thrust. Because I was podcasting and because I had a career in film and TV, a friend from school reached out to me with a story, an absolutely true story. This became The Donor, a DNA horror story. And Hal, let's call him, Hal wanted to do it as a film, a movie, or a TV series. Now, the film business, here's where the film business is scary. I'll answer this part of your question. To take an idea from my head out into the public, to an audience, where an audience might actually get to see it, there are, oh my God, it's years in the making. Got to write the script, all the supporting material. If it's a TV series, it's what's called a Bible. 50 pages of the whole world. And then just to induce these people to read the material, I've got to create kind of like an animated comic book called a pitch deck for them to read it, just to induce them to read it. Years in the making just to get them to look at it and consider what we're storytelling. In podcasting, there's only one person standing between me and getting it out into the world, and that's me. So long as I'm willing to do the work, I got to find the audience, okay, or help the audience find it, but I'll take that challenge. When my friend wanted to turn the thing that became The Donor into a TV series movie, I said, no. First of all, years and years and years that will be wasted, and you'll have to compromise this story so completely. No. And, part of his problem is that he needed to tell his story anonymously, which you'll understand momentarily. And if you're going to change your name and a lot of the other characters' names, you're not a reliable narrator. Who can the audience trust? I said, well, I can tell your story, but we're going to do it as a podcast. In the mid-1980s, Hal worked his way through medical school as an anonymous sperm donor. Jump forward 27 years. He's a successful radiologist. He joins 23andMe curious about his health genes. Doesn't occur to him the ramifications of adding his DNA to a growing DNA database. That's what 23andMe and Ancestry are. He lost his donor anonymity. Suddenly, 7 total strangers found Daddy, except 6 of them had no idea their actual biological father was Hal, a sperm donor. Now, the 7th, here's where it gets really scary. One of the daughters, and these are 25 to 27-year-old people we're talking about. These are young adults. One of the daughters brought a thing called genetic sexual attraction to the table. Now, Hal had been married for 20 years to a woman who brought a son from a previous marriage. And he raised that son as his own, adopted him later as an adult. He never raised any genetic children, biological children of his own. And so when he suddenly had these 7 biological children, he wasn't their father in that he never fathered them, but he was quite open to having whatever kind of relationship they were open to having. Hey, if they wanted some fathering, he was open to that. In fact, he was very well off and was willing to, in a fatherly way, help them with money. And so his mind, he was looking for a family. When this daughter brought genetic sexual attraction it was a hand grenade into the tent. And it destroyed whatever family Hal wanted. And that is the story of The Donor, a DNA horror story. There really is a monster. And with Hal and Becca, this 7th daughter, they never met each other face to face. They had one FaceTime conversation. This intense crazy relationship. It happens almost entirely via text and email. And the strangest thing is the emotional roller coaster ride is all based on a piece of information that really nobody was supposed to find out. And that is really what The Donor, a DNA horror story, 7 episodes at thedonorpodcast.com, what it's all about. Well, while telling that story, and I'll point out, it was while I was working on The Donor that I suddenly realized I had become the thing I always wanted to be, which is a podcaster. Now, the DNA part of the story to me, was truly horrifying. This is far more terrifying than any Joel Silver, and I can deal with him at the end of the day. One way or the other, I can deal with him, but I could not imagine being told as a young adult, hey, you know the story you've been telling yourself about who you are? Forget about it. It's not who you are. One of the people, and again, telling the story opened a door into a world I had no idea it existed, the donor conceived world. Well, one of the people who very kindly agreed to give me background was a woman named Donna Hall. Donna learned at the age of 40 that she was donor conceived. Earth-shattering. But when Donna told me the rest of her story, well, that was a podcast too, and she'd been trying to do that herself. But even a great story needs to be told the right way. And I think that was the problem that Donna was having. She needed a storyteller with a little more perspective who understood how to. Donna grew up in the 80s and 90s in a lower tier crime family outside of Philadelphia. The Halls weren't the Corleones, but they made national headlines just the same. Donna's mom, Phyllis, maybe the worst mom ever. She spent 6 months in prison for child endangerment. Donna's stepfather, John Hall, was the Philadelphia Police Department's favorite snitch. He put more than 25 people behind bars on confessions that were concocted by John to keep him out of the various legal jeopardies or reduce the legal jeopardies, considerable legal jeopardies that he was in. Among the people he put away was his own stepson, Herb, who spent 18 months in prison awaiting trial on a murder charge he did not commit. John also put a man named Walter Ogrod on death row in Pennsylvania for 24 years on a murder that Walter had nothing to do with. Donna describes what it was like growing up inside this family where between all the different forms of abuse, sexual included, that house was a crime scene every day, literally. And so Donna describes what it was like growing up inside this lower tier crime family. And she's a wonderful storyteller, a rock star in my mind. And not an ounce of pity to her story. She's got this, here's the thing. It's not just a true crime story like you've never heard it before, told from really at such a granular level. But for Donna, it's also, the story is her journey to safety and, most importantly, empowerment. And that's what gives the story such incredible resonance, is really what, for her, the podcast itself is a place of safety. Although the stories set your hair on fire. But she's a magnificent storyteller, and she will take you inside this crime family. You know, it's not a story from the past because several of John Hall's victims, though he's been dead 20 years, a man named David Dixon is still serving life for murdering a Drexel college student. He did not do it. He did not do it. This is a John Hall confession. And so finally, they're beginning to re-examine David Dixon's case and the few other cases of the people who are still serving time because of John Hall. It's a story about terrible corruption in the Philadelphia Police Department, the DA's office, because they knew exactly, they knew what John Hall was. He was serving a purpose for them. And so a story of incredible corruption. One story led to another story. And that in turn is also leading to some other stories other projects that I'm working on with. There's a journalist named Tom Lowenstein, who told Walter's story in a book called The Trials of Walter Ogrod. And that's what got Walter off of death row. Not just off of death row. Pennsylvania paid Walter $9 million for what they did to him. And suddenly, hey, I told you I got a taste for weird stories. Suddenly I find myself telling these stories. I couldn't make this up. I couldn't possibly make this up and get away with it. And yet, having learned how to tell my own story, there are all these other incredible stories that, and I'm so honored that these people are allowing me to work alongside them to tell their stories. My little company, and I formed a little company called Costard and Touchstone Productions. And it's Costard and Touchstone. In my very brief acting career, I was in 2 Shakespearean plays, Love's Labour's Lost and As You Like It. I played the wise fool in both. The fool who speaks truth to power. I was Costard in Love's Labour's Lost and Touchstone in As You Like It. So my company is named for the 2 wise fools I played. And so our mission is to make the world a better place through storytelling. And in a world that I think needs storytellers, and podcasters are pure form storytellers, I found myself doing the thing I always wanted to be when I grew up, and creatively too. I find this medium so fulfilling as a storyteller. I walk around these days in a perpetual state of bliss. I've got 5 podcasts out in the world. I just started dropping a new one this past week called Sage Wellness Within Podcast, which is about traditional Chinese medicine. It's such a cool podcast. I've got a new podcast coming out every single month for the rest of this year.
Wow.
And so this is my journey. I have achieved a place where what I loved about TV, what I loved about being in TV production was that, oh my gosh, you've got one that you're writing, one that you're prepping to shoot, one that you're shooting, one that you're just in the editing phase, and one that you're doing the post sound on. And they all have deadlines, and you got to meet them all every single day. I love that. And I missed it during the 2 decades that I spent in the wilderness, such as it was. I miss this because this is my creativity. This is what I was put here to do. In Judaism, there's a concept called tikkun olam. It is actually the basis for do unto others. Every Jew's obligation, it's everyone's obligation, but every Jew, we're told it specifically, is to make the world a better place just for having been in it. How you will accomplish this, that's entirely up to you. Go do. And it is, I have purpose. Every single moment of every single day in my life, I am on a mission. I have learned, and I keep learning every day, that every single person has a story to tell. It's just a matter of how you tell it to make it compelling to outside people to see what is their story, really. What can they contribute to make the world a better place for having been here? And since everyone has a story, that means everyone's got a podcast. Some people have multiple podcasts. People like you and me, we have many, many podcasts, but everyone has at least one. And so my goal, challenge, is to tell each and every one of them.
It's a big goal.
When I wake up, but when I wake up, hey, you're going to shoot for the top of the clouds? No, shoot for the other end of the known universe. Even beyond where you could, because light can only travel so fast. You know, the parts of the universe we will never see ever again because it's too far away now. Shoot for that. Shoot for that.
All right. So we're starting to run out of time here. But before we go, I want to give you a chance to talk about your upcoming movie, Night of the Gnomes. So can you...
Oh, the Internet Movie Database there are people who contribute to it that aren't necessarily me.
Oh.
And Night of the Gnomes is a script that I wrote, during the deepening depression. I someone pitched me an idea and I said, okay, here's how I would do it. There have been a lot of people who want to make Night of the Gnomes. And hey, Night of the Gnomes is there for the taking and the making. So while it is not, it's a movie about a woman who lives on a cul-de-sac. And she's got these garden gnomes, little German lady. And most of the houses on the rest of the cul-de-sac are now vacant. There's one house that transient. And suddenly a drug gang move in there because it's fairly remote. There's just them in this other house. All those half of those garden gnomes are alive. And when the drug gang goes after the woman because suddenly they're a little suspicious of her, the garden gnomes go after the drug gang. And that's Night of the Gnomes. It's very Tales from the Crypt-like in that it's got that sensibility. It's wickedly funny. But I thank you for bringing it up, Melvin, because it's just sitting there. These days, I'm not in the movie or TV business. It's just too hard. I'm in the podcasting business. Hey, that's hard too. But maybe what I ought to do is do Night of the Gnomes as a podcast first.
That sounds like a brilliant idea.
In fact, some of part of the concept of my company is, and a lot of the podcasts that I want to do, I wanted to do as a TV series or features, but the difficulty of having to sell this idea to a guy in a suit, a person in a suit, an executive. Such a lot of bother. But hey, if I do it as a podcast, I put the IP on the table where everybody can see it, including the guys in the suits. And now I've got an audience for it. So instead of having to go and sell it to them, they're going to come to me. Now, again, the content has to be done the right way, but assuming the content is good, they're going to come to me. They're going to go, that'd be a great idea for a movie or a TV series. I'm going to go, yeah, it would. What are you going to do about it? They're going to go, well, I'm going to write you a check. I'm going to go, yeah. They're going to write, I'm going to go, well, you need to add a few more zeros, move that decimal point over, son, because you've got competition. And so part of what I see in podcasting, and because it's storytelling peer-to-peer, our relationship with the audience is very intimate. This flips the entire power dynamic between creatives and the money, because it puts it back where it should be, where the creation, the content is driving the conversation and not the money. And so, one of the other things that I see in this, why everything that I've ever written that hasn't been produced is back to being grist for the mill. And that's because of podcasting.
That's really interesting and exciting to think about. All these ideas out there.
And that's not just me. That's you too, Melvin. Really and truly, that's every single one of us who podcasts. And that's just a matter of, hey, it's like any storytelling. How are you going to tell it? How are you going to think about it? How are you going to frame it? Once you frame it a particular way, well, that's a story that now go tell it. It's your story if you want it to be. That's how I see it.
That's awesome. That's a great way to end this episode.
There you go.
So
we brought it around, man.
Yes, all the way back around. So our guest today has been Tales from the Crypt writer and storyteller, Alan Katz. Thank you so much, Alan, for being here today. It's been a great adventure. You are a magnificent, magnanimous, and graceful host, Melvin. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your podcast. Really and truly, to storytell in your space. Thank you for being here. I enjoyed the stories. So I encourage you to go to our new website, www.podcastreallife.com. And if you go there, you can find the links to every platform that carries this show. You can also find sponsor links and subscription information. It's www.podcastreallife.com. And also, I encourage you to follow Alan Katz's podcast. So the links will be in the show notes. So that's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.